7th, 2020 work session into order and have some conversations. There is some confusion on the agenda tonight, right? Some things that have kind of twisted and turned. I'd like to try and put that into some perspective before we proceed. There was a pre-application meeting with the folks from Natalia on 9/9, and at that time we reviewed their preliminary plans for having a sign on the building and directional signs to help you figure out where to move throughout the property. And the second thing that
Looking for my phone.
they call it? I don't see it.
If you find it, it's probably next to my keys. My keys just up and disappeared about 3 days ago.
Oh, I know.
He's just looking for his,
I thought it was, oh, I get it. Well, do what you gotta do.
Chris,
I'm sorry.
should we proceed?
Proceed, Karen will present.
Yeah, do you think that you can
Yeah, I'd like maybe to take that outside.
open the room?
That's really what I'm asking. So we had the meeting on 9/9, and we looked at there are two packets. One was the directional signs and the sign on the building. At that time, there was a variance that was being proposed, and because of size. And one of the things that we always do in these meetings is say, can we reduce the number of variances? Can we somehow work to eliminate or reduce variances? And one of the things that came up in that meeting is that each of their signs, directional signs, had a smoke-free facility on it at the bottom. And if you just removed that and perhaps had another sign or another way of reflecting that it's a smoke-free facility, the sign would be of appropriate size to be directional and do what it needs to do, but not need a variance. So that's why the signage that's in the first packet on the agenda does not have a variance to it because it fits the size requirements of our sign ordinance, okay? So that first packet is primarily looking at the sign on the building and directional signs to get around the facility. These folks have built a very fine facility and they want people to know when they come up where to go, right? So that's what that signage is for. The second packet was, the second part of their proposal was quite a bit more complicated because we're talking now about signs that would be at the top or at the monument sign near Rockside Road that would be in the city right of way. And that's a much more complex arrangement if you think about it. They had options to perhaps put it in the property that would be right to the east of them. And what came up in the meeting is, would you consider putting it in the road? Because if it goes into the road, then you don't have the variance issue, but you still have the issue associated with being the right of way. They have decided to pull that second one, so that they're only now, and that we have an email that reflects that. They've called the Secretary's office, made that request. We have an email confirming that, and they speak tonight, and when we have our meeting, I'm gonna ask them to confirm it on the record, that that one has been pulled. As not being at this point able to proceed. What I wanted to make you aware of is that I probably would have been suggesting that we would have had to pull it tonight. I don't think it's appropriate for us to have even acted on it. After review of 979, and I was troubled, and I called the assistant law director and talked about it. I mean, we really have a situation where we have a submittal to us, and it's not the property owner. They're asking for us to act on property that they don't control, which is kind of inconsistent with the ordinance, and it would be, probably, we'd be in a position of being asked to approve something, vote on it, and we don't even really have the appropriate, person in front of us making the application. So, probably whatever happens when that reemerges will have to be, you know, a little bit more of an arrangement between the city and the developer about the conditions on which the city would allow that land to be used. And the city might be in a position of being able to grant the authority to them to do that, but it's certainly not us, because the city is the owner of the property. I think that got a little bit garbled as we kind of worked from the planning, from the pre-application meeting, but this is a very unique circumstance. As I tried to think this through, if I wanted to build something on my tree lawn, I would come up and I would be told, thanks for your application, but you can't build it, because there's easements on your tree lawn, right? But this would be like me wanting to build something on my neighbor's tree lawn and coming up and asking for, to put in a submittal for it. They'd say, that's not even your property. You know, and I would expect that they wouldn't even accept my application because I'm not even the owner of record. So there's a lot of confusion on number 2, and this is the work session, so I just wanted to make you aware that that confusion is, I think there's a lot of clarity on the first one. And the second one, there's some confusion between the city and the developer on the best way to proceed to get to the point where we would be in a situation where that authority could be granted them to proceed with whatever version of being in the right-of-way would be appropriate, under terms and conditions that the city has to agree to. Because, you know, you're gonna have somebody that comes into an easement or into a right-of-way, you have to be very, very comfortable that the details have been worked out about liability, about maintenance, about all kinds of things that you would want to do in whatever agreements reached. So they made it very easy for us tonight because the agenda's been, the second one's been pulled. It would've been a little trickier because I think this is a matter of principle. I mean, we can't act and take a vote on something that is not what's being given to us to vote on. There's no standstill. There's nothing we can act on, okay? And frankly, by granting our approval to something that, I think that could only garble things up and make it even worse. Because as I talked with Chris about this, it would seem there's another way to do this that would be cleaner and more appropriate and could be within the principles that we need to uphold. And one of the principles here is that you have to have, you know, the ability to control the land that you want to do something with. And they don't have that ability. So, does that make sense to you?
Mm-hmm.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
it does make sense to me, but does that make the engineer's comments moot?
I don't think they're moot, I just think that we're not in a place where those can be incorporated into a process that we can get to an agreement.
Well, I mean, they're moot for tonight.
For tonight, yes.
Yeah,
for tonight,
yeah,
for
yeah.
tonight. I think that he's very thorough in what he does, and he's looking at it from an engineering perspective. But I'm backing up one step further on this one. So we could, for example, envision that the city would entertain active discussions to see, is there a way for us to reach an agreement? And if there is an agreement that could be reached, the city's really the controlling body to make that decision, because they're the owners of the property. It's not us. And so we have to kind of sort out that and make sure that that's done properly. But we can't table it tonight, because if you table it, you gotta come back and act on it. And if you table it and don't act on it, you're approving it. So you can't accept it if it's wrong. So my plea to you is going to be that we should remove it from the agenda tonight for that reason, but I think it's coming off the agenda so that we can maybe find another way to do the right thing. And that's the result. I mean, I do want to say that I appreciate the investment, and I really want to see signage done well on this property, you know? And what we're acting on tonight is signage that's kind of back where the development is, but we want to see a monument sign that reflects something they're pleased with and something the city's pleased with. I mean, this is kind of like the gateway into the city, first sign you're going to see. It'd be nice to know that it's well done. And it's done in a way that can be, you can feel proud of. But right now, we have to just stop and wait to see what's the process coming through us.
Mr. Chairman.
Yes.
Is it safe to assume that the city wasn't looking to us for preliminary approval of the signage for their process of deciding the use of the property? Is it?
I think that's a safe assumption.
Okay.
I think one of the things that was talked about is that, you know, before we kind of work this through, is that we could figure out, is this an appropriate sign? We could, you know, we could work on this.
Yeah.
There's no doubt in my mind, we could work on it and come up with a recommendation and write a report, and it might be a valuable piece of the process. But I think the expectation of us being able to say we've approved it is an expectation that can't be met. Because we can't, you know. So it's a little it's complicated, it's garbled, it's, you know, I think one of the reasons we wanted Erie Bank to give us their signage, and it wasn't in their original submittal, is I don't want to do this. I think we want to look at the signs if we can as part of the submittal and do it, you know. This case was different. I wasn't around for the original proposal here, but we want this done right, and we want to do it in a way that, you know, would stand the test of scrutiny. And right now, I think, number one, we can act on with confidence. Number two, the right thing to do is pull it and figure out how we can act on it with confidence. And I think we'd be willing to help, but we have to help council figure out what to do with our property.
So, Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
has the application, or I suppose, has that issue been pulled by the applicant, or do we have to vote on that to effectuate that process tonight?
It's a good question. I asked the same one, and when they called, when the folks here called, we asked to put it in an email, and I just saw before the meeting that we have an email that's officially pulling it. I think with that, and I'll just, you know, look to the law director, if when it comes time for the meeting, if they on record say, yes, we have sent an email and we're confirming that we pull it, is that acceptable to us rather than taking a vote to remove it?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, this is Christine Tobin. I think that would be appropriate to have the applicants confirm that on the record for you.
Very good, thank you. So that's what we can do, is to, just 'cause they're here tonight, we've got their email, we can confirm it with them on record, and I think that will handle it. So now let's get back to the one we can act on.
Mr. Foley,
Yeah.
I have to interject something here, because Christine, do you want to speak to this as to where we're going to go from here?
Councilman Snitsky, this is Christine Tobin. I think that would be better saved for another day. I'm not sure we all know where it goes from here, but we do know that Planning Commission doesn't have the authority under 979-13 to consider review and approval of a sign package
All right.
from other than an owner.
Is Mr. Foley aware of what happened at the last council meeting?
I don't know, you can ask him.
I'm aware of what happened in your committee meeting.
Oh, in my committee meeting?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, all right, because Mr. McCafferty is saying that he asked the question, does council want some advice from the planning commission as to what to do? And, you know, two council members and the mayor's office basically said going to council initially was inappropriate. That it should go to the planning commission first. So, I mean, I can see holding off until things are a little clearer, but in the 10 years I've been involved in city government, this is only the second time I've been involved in a catch-22.
Well,
And I don't know, you know, it seems like there's two entities here that both want to do the right thing, and these people have built a marvelous facility, put a lot of time and money into it. But I mean, it's like, I don't know where we go from here, and I'm not sure that, based upon what I've already run into, that the council isn't looking for an opinion from the planning commission at some point as to what they think is a good idea,
Well,
before they act on it as the representative of the city.
I
So,
appreciate that, and I went and I listened to the recording of the committee meeting. Here's where I think things got a little, the committee meeting almost seemed like there was something that needed to be done. When I think the purpose of it coming to the committee was to make the city government aware that this was a unique circumstance that was gonna require a negotiation, to require some way of officially agreeing that someone can use our property.
All right,
Not to make a decision, but to inform and enlighten that that was the case.
right.
Once that informing and enlightened occurs, then there's an opportunity now to say, well, we gotta figure out how we're gonna move
All
forward
right,
here.
fine.
And I've looked at several options with Christine. I think we're down to just a couple, but this is not a planning commission thing alone. This is frankly, we're a smaller piece of this. The bigger piece is how do we legally proceed so that you can do something to take care of people that have made an investment in the city.
Okay.
Make sure they get a sign.
All right, that's fine. I mean, it was, somebody approached me about letting somebody speak, and I didn't see any reason not to let somebody that has business in front of the city to speak. I didn't know it was already on the agenda for the planning commission, and I didn't know that there had been any discussions between law and planning about how to proceed. So I kind of walked into it and basically had my head handed to me, so.
Well, and I listened to that, and, we're a city that, maybe sometimes we don't have the infrastructure to make sure things happen, but I also listened to the assistant law director's comments during your committee meeting, and they were spot on.
They were spot on.
Spot on.
You know what, though?
I
I
don't
wish.
think they were heard. I don't think they were heard.
I wish I'd have had those comments a little bit earlier.
Well, and realize, it's a committee meeting.
I know.
It's designed to help frame
I-
up a way forward, so how we do things.
Well, we definitely know that we're going to need some collaboration between the committee and the and council, but like I said, I wish I'd have known what had happened before. I tried to be a nice guy and let somebody speak to my committee, so, okay, that's it, thank you.
Yeah, I guess my only counsel on all of this, and I'm learning like we're all learning, it's like organizational development, how do you learn? I went through the trials and tribulations. I think there are different agenda items. There are agenda items to inform, there are agenda items to discuss, and there's agenda items to decide. I think what I saw come up in committee was almost like there was something that had to be done, when literally it was an inform that there's an issue here that we need to figure out our way forward and realize that this is a little bit more complex than, and I think we need to be aware of that as a city, and then we can figure out our way forward. So I think that we got to learn perhaps how to handle these unique situations a little bit better than we have. I mean, this is not disaster. We recover from this and we move on,
No.
we learn, and there's no big deal here.
Mr.
The main
Chairman?
thing is we got a lot of investment that's been made and we want signage on it. We're compatible with your objectives. We got to find our way to do it in a very difficult scenario where we're dealing with small pieces of property, with variances, right-of-ways, all kinds of things, complexities between you and neighbors and all that stuff. We got to find our way forward so that we can do the right thing.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
Would it be appropriate to give recommendation of a possible path forward from previous experience with similar projects?
I think what we probably should do right now is, I can tell you the assistant law director here has got the options analyzed. And I think we ought to leave it with her to work with council to help figure out the best way. We stand ready to help. That's certainly something, but we want to meet and make recommendations. We'll do that. I mean, we can be a piece of the process so that they feel they've got our support. They just can't expect our approval because we can't approve it. So I think at this point, the best thing we can do is leave it with our assistant law director, who has analyzed this and I think is in a pretty good position to help us move forward with it. Does that sound all right?
Yes.
Okay. If we could get back to the one that we can act on, let's just have a discussion about that. Have you seen the first packet that you got had agenda item 1 on it, didn't it? Where you saw the sign on the building and you saw the directional signage when you came up into the property? Knowing that it has been, it is framed up now as not needing variances. So the complexity of it from that perspective has gone way, way down. What we're supposed to be looking at is, we're looking at, under 979, we're supposed to be reviewing this plan, including standards for signs and directional signs. And so, this is clearly something under 979 that if we have an owner of the property presenting, we can act on. We have an obligation to act according to 979. But it also is an indication, if you go to our sign ordinance, that we're supposed to be making sure that there's an appropriate, palette of colors, it's compatible with the neighborhood, we think there's no obstructions, this is a reasonable sign package for us to approve. This one is quite a ways off the road, and it really is more for helping someone when they start entering the property, see the building and know where to go. That's really what this directional signage is for. So as you looked it over, I think what we're trying to do is give some, we don't have, Roman Gothic style that everybody's sign has to comply with. It pretty much fits the character of the development as long as it's not in conflict with anything else. And, like I said, it's all stuff on the property, on the building. Did you have any comments when you reviewed it?
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
I think the signs look beautiful, and I think that the design with the kind of petals is reminiscent of the symbol for the city of Seven Hills, and therefore makes it especially appropriate, I suppose.
Bless you. You did your best to hold that one in, I could tell.
Came out his ears.
And I would concur with that. I think the signage is attractive and clear and probably fits the emblem and the feel that they're trying to project for their development. So I couldn't find fault with it in any way. Does anybody else have anything you?
I thought maybe scarlet and silver might be more appropriate.
You want some Ohio State colors in there?
But other than that, that's all I have.
Anybody?
Fine.
I think so too. Anybody else got any comments? And if you read the building commissioner's report, I like the way you had your original and you kind of updated it with the yellow that helped us understand the changes. In regards to this, the scoping down of it so that it fits the size. I did have one question I thought I'd ask you while you're here. Will there be a separate no smoking sign, smoke-free facility sign?
I guess my question is, just, we had no smoking community on there, the minimum square footage.
Yeah.
I didn't want to get a variance. If I could get another sign that says no smoking community, do I have to come back to this here again? I'm not gonna come back.
Yeah, I really thought I might see it on here after our preliminary, I thought I'd see a sign that said, this is a smoke-free facility. 'Cause
It might be our entryways if you walk in.
Yeah.
Yeah, the world's changed, so, I don't know that you have to have neon lights on that like maybe you did 10, 20 years ago.
I have no problem getting rid of that.
Okay.
I understand that.
So if you had it, coming, when you walk into the building, you had a sign or something.
Right out of the door.
Mr. Chairman, I have a question. Mine or on?
Button up is on.
So you have independent living quarters at this site, right? So do people sign a lease to no smoking?
Yes,
Okay,
we have to agree to that.
that's interesting.
That makes sense. That does make sense.
Well, not that I, just wondered.
Mr. Chairman, I have a question, just that may be obvious, but signage inside the building is not subject to approval by the planning commission, is that correct?
To my understanding, no.
May we ask the law director to
Yes.
confirm?
Listen, law director, if they want to put something in the hallway or in the
Well,
building.
unfortunately, I only have part of the sign ordinance with me, but I'm just looking at 17103. Sign used in the chapter, we can ask the building commissioner as well, means indoors or outdoors, used to advertise, identify, display, direct, or attract attention. Doesn't seem to apply to no smoking.
Yeah, I guess the question is though, when I read through, like I read the permit section even of the signage ordinance, it's all about, you know, how to suspend it so the wind doesn't get to it. It's, what to withstand a wind load and have vertical and horizontal overhead electrical lines. I mean, there's no implications here that anything would be applied for, what's attached to, the building for fire and prevention. It doesn't make any reference to the fact that if they put signage in their hallways, that that's something that we would have anything to do with permitting or approving. Is that a true statement, or?
Can I answer that?
Yes, please.
Yeah, that would be a true statement. If it was in the front window vestibule, that would be a different story. That would be considered a window sign, and that would be classified as something.
Something that you'd say, you can't have your windows full of signage and all of that. You've got some standards with that, but that's, you're talking about putting things in the building, right? That's in the building, yeah. So that's why I took your question, was in the building,
Yes.
yeah.
And the other circumstance would be a mall, maybe set up where there was multiple stores and that kind of thing. Then you would have discretion.
And may I also just add,
Please.
there's also reference to obstructing emergency means of egress. I don't know if you just said that, I couldn't hear it, but those kinds of implications would require review, but I don't think that's what we're hearing here.
That's how we're hearing, yeah. Good. All right, so no other questions on that agenda item? If I could just mention a few things, then we can move into the meeting. We did have a pre-application meeting with NEO Church that I found very interesting. And I just want to share it with you because you never know where these things are going to go. But this is the church that is off of Pleasant Valley as you go up to the senior development, I forget which, Autumn Hill. And it was a church, a Methodist church, I believe, that was sold to what is called NEO Church. And they've been meeting there, and their congregation, that looks like they're very vibrant and they'd like to expand. They're envisioning after COVID that they can, you know, be much more aggressive getting together. And they have a building that is not, the sanctuary is not sized to match the building. The building has a lot of educational space. It has a lot of room for, they used to run a daycare there, and they've got a lot of that kind of square footage. But yet their building where they would hold a service doesn't hold many people at all. So what they want to do is expand that so that they can have more people meet for their actual service. So they presented some, you know, very preliminary plans. They had an architect come up from Columbus. And we just chatted with, you know, what kind of variances they might need. Gave them, you know, Chris Tobin gave them some things they might want to read to help figure out how we could maybe deal with setback a little bit better. And they were going to go back and work on that so that they could figure out how to present something, again, that had minimal variance, fit the neighborhood the best way. But they need a pretty substantial increase in their square footage for their sanctuary. And they want to do it in a way that's not overly high, and they had a picture that looked quite nice, but they're going to be working on that. So the other thing that was very encouraging is right in the meeting, they talked about how they're trying to work with neighbors. And there's some issues associated with water from their property going
Yes.
into the... And so right there in the meeting, they made a commitment that they would pull a permit and work with the neighbors to see what they could do with their congregation working to deal with that.
Good.
That has happened. And you have emails from Autumn Hills Homeowners Association to the church saying, thank you for caring and helping us deal with our water. I mean, it was just kind of, it was almost like it was worth the meeting just for that to happen. If nothing else happens, you know, it was worth the meeting. But these are very nice folks. They're very passionate about what they do. They do have an architect, so they're serious, but they don't want to go into a fundraising mode until they really feel like they're ready. So there is a preliminary meeting that didn't have, you know, all the drawings and everything. It was a preliminary meeting, almost. But I was very pleased with the meeting. I thought they were, we learned a lot about what they're trying to do. They run things during the week and the evening. They really have a vision for trying to expand their influence and their involvement within the city. So I'll let, you know, we'll know whether that goes anywhere with, when we see what happens with it going forward. My suspicion is it might. I think they're pretty committed to wanting to expand that property.
Thank you, Mr. Foley, because I've had many conversations with the people that butt up against that property about the water issues that are coming off of that property. So I have to thank you immensely for bringing that up,
And
because
thank Dan
anything that's
Collins.
going to happen with that church is going to have to resolve that issue.
Yeah, they want to be good neighbors, and they explained that they get it from both ends. They've got people that want them to meet more, and then they've got people that when they meet, they condemn them because of COVID, you know, so they kind of like, they got people on both sides. They're trying to walk the line and be good neighbors and all that, but this thing with the water was something that they really resonated with them, and said, we'd like to help, and Dan Collins said, the way you can do this is pull a permit, and I'll work with you, and we can figure out what to do.
Good,
And-
good.
And they got the muscle power, and
Good.
it was really a very encouraging, almost like a soothing team building session in a way, you know, in the way that it rolled out. So I was very pleased with that. If you look at the action register, I just want to make sure that when you look at the bluffs, have had almost very little conversation with the developer. I got one email on one small topic, but I don't know of any official next steps with that. We'll have to see what happens. The Erie Bank, if you look at where things stand, the variances were approved by the zoning board. We see the contingencies there. They're going to the zoning board on 10/14. So you can see that that's the next step, is on the 14th of October. They'll be dealing with that variance that they have to seek. So I hope that's on track, because that was a real positive submittal that we acted on.
Yes.
The fast food Dairy Queen, we know that their vote, they're on the ballot, and council has worked to make sure that happens. So whether you get your mail-in ballot or you go to the ballot box, you're going to find that they're on the ballot. I just want to share with you, they contacted me wanting me to, get involved, in some way with helping them, and I don't think that's appropriate for an appointed body to get political. So the only thing I shared with them is I think that they should do all they can to make sure that the opportunity is clear to people. And so I suggested that, make sure you get your message out. So what they've done is, you got your mailer at the house, didn't you, the cardboard? And they put up their banner in front of Ruby Tuesdays. So, I mean, and the banter on that looks pretty good to me. I just shared with you the work session that we had with Battaglia, so we'll kind of leave it with that. Now they're on with this. But we're trying to track things as we do them, so that the action register is something that's a live document that we can keep working on.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
Since you've kind of raised the subject on the action register, the Bluffs project, wasn't there a timeline whereby the final development agreement had to be signed to make everything work?
There is a development agreement, but it has in it extensions that are guaranteed for a while, and then they have to be agreed to. So, I mean, it's this thick, and we worked on that real hard 2 summers ago. It's been a long time. We did grant approval on that. I think it was November of 18. I think that's the right time. Our preliminary approval was November of 18. So I'm kind of curious as to where that's going to go after that. My understanding is that would have to be renewed or extended from the 2-year timeline. So I'm kind of curious where all that stands. We're just going to have to wait and see, They have our preliminary approval at this point. It's pretty clear what the expectations are to deal with the contingencies. I've just not had personal involvement with dealing with the contingency. So, like I said, other than an email I got last month, I hadn't, I'm not that active. I don't know if that's COVID related or whether they're just kind of working on the side and lining things up to launch from COVID differently. But you can see the things that have been done. The MOU's been agreed to, so you have a development agreement. Council passed an ordinance so that we have the economic study. The development agreement's been signed, we know that, and the Parma School Board has passed a resolution approving TIF. So we've done all we can do at this point. I mean, it has to come back to us now for something that can progress. I think, I hope I can speak for you that it can't come back in a form that is unacceptable, was unacceptable to us 2 years ago, will not be acceptable now, right? I mean, we really made sure that our approval, with all the different stipulations that contained in there about the number of apartments and number of housing and apartments over what, and all the things that we had detailed out, they're all alive and well. And you cannot, you never would say, well, to move it forward, I'll agree to give in on some of those. Because I think that we negotiated a very solid agreement, the development agreement, that takes care of the interests of the city in a way that would be acceptable. And you don't change that and agree to something different going forward without really understanding the implications of how it affects the economics, how it affects sequencing, how it affects the safety stage, all the things we work through. So I'm hopeful that something would happen with that, but when you update the action register, I have nothing to update. So does that speak?
That answers my question, thank you.
Mr. Chairman, while we're still in work session, I happened to peek at my upcoming ballot for the election, and I see that there's a zoning change being sought for a chicken joint, Cane's, I believe it is, on Rockside Road, and this is just for my own knowledge and understanding what purpose that we serve as we went through the action on the Dairy Queen. We saw no action on the Cane's. I just, if you could explain to me, I don't understand why we may or may not be in that process or how that comes about.
Yeah, and I, because you know that when we dealt with Ruby Tuesdays, we knew that there was Broadview Road zoning ordinance that had to be changed to reflect that, drive-through was acceptable. And so we're able to research that by looking at what zoning on Broadview Road,
what needs to be adjusted, and that came through us. When you're dealing with Rockside, you're dealing with the 979 PUD ordinance, which is an ordinance that allows council to have control over that block of land to be used within the purposes that it's indicated for. And so the process of having that be rezoned is different than anywhere else outside the PUD.
Okay.
All right? So, I mean, we really thoroughly went through the Dairy Queen. But I think there is a little bit of a surprise that would say, do you mean to tell me that on Rockside Road, we could have fast food, Raising Cane's? That's a little different than the Bluffs, right? So that's not been vetted here at all. We haven't talked about that because it's not for us to act on, But I think, I think I will say this, and I've gotten to the point in my life where I say what I think, and if people don't like it, I'll leave. It's okay with me. But I will say this, that there was a unofficial meeting where the system law director and I came up and gave a complete review of our thoughts on Rockside Road to council. And the perils of doing this and the advantages and disadvantages, and we can only advise. They're the elected representatives act. And you saw their action said, we're going to put this on the ballot and this is the way it's going to go, okay? So I will tell you though, that I'm not shy about saying it, that I think that what we did was make sure that the pros and cons of this were well in front of people. So that there's no, we didn't know. And I think our council liaison was in that meeting.
Yep.
So we're very, very careful in making sure, because I want informed decision-making. And I've got my own views on that. But my views came at doing an analysis, and I wanted to make sure that my city was doing that analysis, because I think it's a pretty big deal when the first thing you build on Rockside Road is on the frontage. You want to make sure it's done right, Yet there's complexities and nuances associated with the property and everything else. There's a lot of things you could talk about. But the bottom line is council acted and put it on the ballot for people to vote on. And that's their prerogative under the PUD.
And if you want,
System law director? Yes.
If I may, Mr. Chairman and Mr. McCafferty, just to explain why Planning Commission wasn't referred that matter for review. Under our charter, any zoning ordinance amendment, which is what was involved with regard to the Broadview Road District for Dairy Queen. That zoning change required a review by Planning Commission under the charter. The other matter with regard to Rockside Road was actually not a zoning ordinance amendment. It was actually just an ordinance to place a charter amendment on the ballot. So there was a distinction in terms of the process to be followed. So one being a ordinance to place a charter amendment on the ballot, which happened to do with, changing the 14, the Amendment 14, and the other one being an actual amendment to a zoning ordinance, allowing a different use in a district. Hope that helps.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I will say that in my quick reading of my pre-ballot, I probably did not breathe that depth into charter versus zoning changes. So I stand corrected.
But it's fair to say that the PUD did not allow for that establishment to be built, correct?
No, that's correct.
correct,
The
so-
charter amendment did not prohibit freestanding fast food. So that's why there was a request to amend that charter provision. And I'm not correcting you, Mr. McCafferty, I'm just explaining that.
No, I
Yeah,
understand.
ultimately-
Again, I didn't read that much detail into charter versus zoning. It appeared to be a zoning change, obviously.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
If you want me to give a sense of what was discussed at council for whoever's listening, I can do that real quick if you'd like, after you gave your very well-done analysis of the change down there. A couple things. The world of fast food drive-in has changed immensely with COVID and since all of the ordinances were originally written about fast food. You didn't have curbside pickup when that was started, so to try to quantify what degree of fast food is okay got to be, it's just astronomical. I've had discussions with Christine about this, and it's hard to pinpoint. That particular property is basically been on the market for 2 years, and the only interest they've had in that little slice of property is a food place, fast food place, or a gas station. And the perception was that, it's sitting there, there's little you can do with it because of the size of the property. The people over that are in the larger property indicated to the mayor that they didn't have a problem with it, which was very important to me. And I specifically asked them that, and they indicated they didn't have a problem with it. And the perception is that this isn't your typical hamburger joint. So for a lot of reasons, council thought, hey, you know what? There was a good faith effort to do something with it other than a food place. Isn't working out. We have an interest. Let's let them do it. Let's put it to the people and see if it's okay. And that's how it all came about.
That's where it stands today.
Right.
Mr. Chairman, just for clarification, my original inquiry was only to determine the difference between what
The pathway.
we wind up here and what we don't wind up here. It's not about the project itself. My comments were
Yeah.
just strictly what the jurisdiction is for my own personal.
Yeah, your question was a process question.
Yes, more of a process question than
wanted
any
to
comment on the
yeah.
particular what happened.
You saw something and said, hey, I'm not seeing this in the planning commission.
Right.
I appreciate it. Okay, is it appropriate then, that's all I have, that we move into our official meeting? Who would, we'll take a motion on only agenda item number 1. I will ask when we get to that point that the applicant come forward and clearly indicate that item number 2 on our agenda is something you have removed by way of email, and you're confirming that tonight. So we'll do that, and we'll start our meeting.
So I'd like to call our October 7th, 2000.
Wait.
What?